Part 2. The burial ceremony was held in a nearby communal graveyard. It was surrounded by a broken-down fence, and within were several circular stone slabs inscribed with people's names. The village chief recited the verses to ease the spirits of the dead, and the words from his mouth appealed to a god that Ains had never heard of in Yggdrasil. It was a prayer that the spirits of the dead would find peace. It appeared that there were not enough hands to bury all the bodies at once, so they chose to bury some of them first. To Ains, burying the dead on the day they died was too hasty, but perhaps this was a normal practice for the faiths in this world. He spotted the sisters he saved among the other villagers, Enriemet and Nemuemet. Their parents' bodies were among those that would be buried today. As he watched the villagers from close by, he idly stroked a 30-centimeter-long wand under his robe. The wand was made of ivory and capped with gold. There were runes over the grip and it radiated an aura of holiness. It was a wand of resurrection. It was a magic item which could return the dead to life. Of course, Ains did not possess just one of these wands. He had enough to resurrect all the dead in the village, with room to spare. According to the village chief, this world's magic did not have the power to raise the dead. That being the case, if he used the wand of resurrection, he would create a miracle in this village. However, after the prayer finished, as the burial ceremony neared its end, Ains returned the wand to his inventory. He could have brought them back to life, but he chose not to. This was not because he felt that the souls of the dead were the domain of the gods, or some other religious reason. It was simply because he felt that there were no benefits in doing so. It was not hard to tell which would be more threatening, a magic caster that could take lives, or a magic caster which could return them. In addition, the chances of the villagers keeping the secret would be very low, even if he ordered them not to talk about the resurrections. The power to conquer death was something that everyone craved. If things were different, he might have used that power to recall people to life. However, he did not have enough information on the local conditions, so it would be unwise to do so now. They should be content with the fact that the village was saved. Ains muttered as he looked at the Death Knight that was standing behind him. The Death Knight was another mystery. In Yggdrasil, all summoned monsters would vanish after a certain time unless special methods were used in their summoning. He had not used any such methods to summon the Death Knight, and its summoning time was long past, but it remained here. Although he had many hypotheses for this phenomenon, he still did not know enough to come to an answer. As Ains was thinking about this, a pair of figures turned up beside him. One was albedo, and the other was roughly humanoid, but resembled a spider dressed in a ninja uniform. Its 8 legs were tipped with sharp blades. An 8-edged assassin. Albedo, this is. Ains looked around, but it seemed like none of the villagers were paying attention here. Albedo was one thing, but bringing a monster here would make them the center of attraction, even if the burial was going on. Just then, Ains remembered that 8-edged assassins were monsters that could go invisible. I brought him over because he wanted to pay his respects to you, Ains-sama. Oh, how refreshed my soul is whenever I see Ains SA. Enough of that. Are you part of the support troops? Yes. There are 400 vassals beside myself who stand ready to assault the village at any time. Assault? How had it ended up like this? As Ains pondered that problem, he began muttering to himself, Sebas had no talent for passing messages. There's no need for an assault, the problem's already been taken care of. Who's your commander? That would be Ura-sama and Mare-sama. Demiurge-sama and Shaltir-sama remain in Nazarick on alert, while Kozitis-sama is supervising Nazarick's perimeter security. I see. Well, too many cooks spoil the broth. Everyone but Aura and Mare to fall back. How many of you 8-edged assassins are there? There are 15 of us in total. Then you can stay with Aura and Mare. After watching the 8-edge assassin nod in acknowledgement, Ains turned his eyes back to the burial. They were about to fill in the graves, and the two girls were crying non-stop. In order not to interrupt the burial, Ains strolled leisurely toward one of the roads leading to the village. Behind him were Albedo and the Death Knight. Though his information gathering had been interrupted by the funeral, Ains had still managed to learn much about the region and the ways of this world. By the time he left the village chief's home, the sun was going down. It would seem his little hero act to pay forward the kindness his old friend showed him had taken more time than expected. Still, the time spent here had not been wasted. In particular, the more he learned about this world, the more he realized he did not know. It was enough that he was aware of his ignorance. As Ains watched the magnificent sunset, he thought about what he needed to do. It was dangerous to move around in this world when he did not understand anything about it. Ideally, he should finish gathering information and then begin acting in this world under a false identity. Although, after saving this village, hiding his identity was impossible. Even if the knights were exterminated, their parent country would unearth the truth. Much like in the previous world where forensic science was well developed, this new world might have its own ways of finding out the truth, and they might be very efficient in doing so. Also, even if they made no investigation, as long as the villagers survived, someone would eventually follow the trail back to Ains. To prevent a leak, he could take them all into the great underground tomb of Nazarick. However, the country that these villagers belonged to would not take that lying down, and they might even treat it as a kidnapping. Therefore, he had stated his name, and let the knights flee. There were two reasons for that. The first reason was that news about Ains would get around as long as he did not hole up in Nazarick. Therefore, it would be better if he controlled how the information got out. The second was because he wanted to spread the word that Ains Ulgaun saved a village and Slough the knights. In particular, he wanted to let any players from YGGDRASIL hear about it. Ains planned to take up residence in either the kingdom, the empire, or the theocracy. If there were other players in these countries, there should be some trace of them. In contrast, if Ains used Nazarick's personnel to gather this information, it would not only be troublesome, but very risky. For instance, given Albedo's personality, giving her the wrong kind of orders would end up making him unnecessary enemies. Therefore, from an information-gathering point of view, joining one of the countries was a very good idea. It would also be good to have one of them as backing in order to ensure the autonomy of Nazarick. After all, he could not take these countries lightly while he was not aware of their power. In addition, he could not lower his guard as long as he did not know who was the most powerful person in this new world. For all Ains knew, there might be someone stronger than him among these three nations. While there were a lot of drawbacks to becoming part of one of these kingdoms, there were many advantages as well. The question was the capacity in which he would join one of these countries. He was not interested in being a slave. Neither was he interested in becoming part of a black-hearted enterprise like the one Hero-Sam was in. Therefore, he needed to make his existence known to these factions. After having a closer look at their respective situations and how they treated him, he would move toward the most ideal of the factions. These were the basics of job hopping. In that case, when should he make his move? He might end up exposing his weaknesses while he remained ignorant. Ains shook his head as he thought about that, as though he were tired. After all, he had been ceaselessly using his mind for the past few hours, and it was overstressed. Let's leave it at this. We've finished everything we need to do here. Albedo, let's go back. Understood. Albedo's reply sounded very tense. There should be no reason for her to be so on edge in a harmless place like the village. In that case, there was only one reason he could think of for Albedo to be like this. Ains quietly asked Albedo, "Do you hate humans?" "I detest them. Humans are weak and inferior life forms. They would look so pretty if I squashed them like bugs. Besides that girl." Albedo's words were as sweet as honey, yet their meaning was terribly cruel. Ains felt that they did not fit Albedo's benign, goddess-like beauty. Therefore, he said, "I see. I understand how you feel. However, I hope you can control yourself for the time being, because we have to put on a show." Albedo nodded energetically. As Ains looked at her, he began to feel frustrated. Her likes or dislikes would not be a problem for now, but the future was a different matter. Understanding his subordinates was an important skill he had to master. After Ains realized this, he began looking for the village chief. It was basic manners to bid someone farewell before leaving. He found the chief almost immediately, talking to some of the villagers. He had a stern look on his face, but it did not seem normal. Indeed, he seemed to be quite wound up. What was happening now? Ains resisted the urge to go che, and approached the chief. After all, he had saved them once. That meant that they were his responsibility. "What's wrong, Chief Dono?" The chief's face lit up, as though he had glimpsed a golden shiny wire of hope. "Oh, Ains-sama. It would seem there are some mounted people who look to be warriors approaching us." "I see." The chief and the other nearby citizens looked at Ains, worried expressions on their faces. Ains gently raised his hand as he saw this, which filled everyone with relief as he said, "Leave it to me. Gather all of the survivors into the village chief's house right now. The chief and I will remain here." A bell rang, and the villagers gathered. The Death Knight took up a position near the chief's house, while Albedo remained behind him, awaiting orders. In order to dispel the chief's unease, Ains cheerfully said, "Please be at ease. I will make an exception and handle this for free." The chief no longer trembled, and smiled bitterly instead. Perhaps he had prepared himself to take this risk. After a while, they finally sighted many mounted warriors along the road leading to the village. The horsemen slowly entered the square. They aren't uniformly equipped, and each of them is outfitted differently. Are they not regular troops? Ains mused as he observed the men and their war gear. The knights from before had breastplates bearing the sigils of the Baharuth Empire, and they were heavily equipped, each in the same way. While these men were wearing armor as well, their gear varied from man to man. Some wore leather armor and some did not have their plate armor on, exposing the chainmail underneath. Some of them wore helmets, while some went bareheaded. About the only thing they had in common was that they each showed their faces. All of them had swords of similar make, but apart from that, they also carried bows, javelins, maces, and other backup weapons. One could say that they looked like hardened veterans of the battlefield. A less polite way would be to say that they were a ragtag bunch of sellswords. The riders finally entered the square. There were around 20 of them, and while they were wary of the Death Knight, they formed up neatly before Ains and the village chief. A man stepped forward from the rest of the force. He seemed to be the leader of the horsemen. He looked like the fiercest and most eye-catching one of his men. The leader's eyes rested briefly upon the village chief before lingering on the Death Knight, and then he turned toward Albedo. He took a long time looking at her. However, once he satisfied himself that none of them were going to move, he immediately turned his keen gaze on Ains. Although the man looking at him seemed to be the sort who made his living by violence, Ains remained still. A look like that could not hope to raise any ripples on the still lake of Ains's heart. It was not because Ains did not fear those eyes, but because of his undead body. Perhaps he was full of confidence because he could use his powers from YGGDRASIL. Once satisfied, the leader spoke in a grave tone. I am the warrior captain of the Riesti's kingdom, Gazef Stronov. By order of the king, I have been visiting each of the frontier villages to exterminate knights from enemy countries who have been making trouble here. His even baritone echoed through the village square, and there was some commotion from the chief's house behind Ains, the kingdom's warrior captain. Won't anyone tell me what's going on? Ains thought as he spoke to the chief, his voice carrying a hint of rebuke. What sort of man is he? According to the traders, he was a man who claimed the championship of the martial arts tournament held before the king, and now he leads the elite warriors who are loyal to the king. Is the man before us truly so amazing? I do not know. All I heard were stories. Ains looked closely, and he saw that each of the horsemen had the same emblems on their chest, which resembled what the chief had said about the kingdom's emblems. That said, he did not have enough reliable information to be sure. Gazef looked at the chief and said, "You must be the chief of this village. Can you tell me who is the person beside you?" Ains interrupted the chief, who was about to answer, before nodding to Gazef and introducing himself. "There is no need for that. Pleased to meet you, warrior captain Dono of the kingdom. My name is Ains Ulgaun, and I am a magic caster. This village was attacked by knights, and so I stepped in to rescue them." Gazef immediately dismounted, his armor clattering loudly as he did. He bowed deeply once he was on the ground. "Thank you for saving this village. I have no words that can adequately praise your kindness." The air seemed to tremble. The warrior captain was a man from a privileged class of society. It was quite shocking that such a man would bow and scrape before a nobody like Ains, in this world where people were so clearly divided amongst each other. From what he had heard, the concept of human rights was almost non-existent in this country. No, in this world. A few years ago, the kingdom still sanctioned the slave trade. One could tell Gazef's character from the way he was ready to dismount and bow to Ains despite their difference in status. This man is definitely the kingdom's warrior captain, Ains concluded. Please, do not stand on ceremony. In truth, I did this for payment, so no thanks is need. Oh, a payment. Does this mean that you are an adventurer? That is close enough to the truth. Oh, I see. You must be an extraordinary adventurer, then. Although, forgive my ignorance, but I have not heard your mighty name before, Gaundono. I was traveling, you see, and I just happened to pass by. I am nobody famous. Traveling, you say? Though I regret having to waste the time of such a great adventurer, could you please tell me about the blackguards who attacked this village? It would be my pleasure, warrior captain Dono. Most of the knights who have attacked this village are already dead, so they will not be able to make trouble for the time being. Shall I go on? Already dead. Gaundono, did you strike them down? After listening to the way Gazef spoke, Ains realized that this world's form of address was Western style, and not Japanese style. In other words, it went in the order of name, then surname, and not surname, then name. At last, he had solved the mystery of why the chief looked so baffled when he had asked the chief to call him Ains. It was only expected that he would look like that when asked to address someone in such an unfamiliar way. After realizing his mistake, Ains covered it up with his salaryman's thick skin and replied, "Well, that is not entirely accurate." Gazef picked up on the hint in Ains's tone, and turned his eyes toward the Death Knight. He must have smelled the faded scent of gore and death that came from it. I have a couple of questions. May I know who that is? He is a servant that I have created. Gazef murmured in approval, and then looked Ains up and down with a keen gaze. Then, how about that mask? I wear it for reasons known only to a magic caster. May I remove that mask? Sadly, I must refuse, Ains said as he gestured to the Death Knight. It would not be good if I lost control of him. A look of shock flashed across the face of the chief and gasps came from the villagers hiding within the chief's house. Perhaps he had sensed the change in the air and seen the look on the chief's face, but Gazef nodded deeply and said, I see. Then, we'd best not take it off. Thank you. Then, before that, I have a request you might not like to hear. This village was recently attacked by Knights of the Empire, and if you gentlemen brought your weapons in, it might trigger unpleasant memories in the villagers. May I ask you to place your weapons in a corner of the village square, to put the people at ease? It is as you say, Gaundono. However, this sword was given to me by the king. I cannot set it down without his express permission. Ains-sama, we will be fine. Is that so, Chief Sama? Then, please forgive my unreasonable request, Warrior Captain Dono. No, I see the logic in your thinking, Gaundono. If this sword had not been personally awarded to me by the king, I would gladly lay it aside. Then, could we sit down and discuss the details? Also, the sky is growing dark, and we would like to rest in this village for the night. I understand. Then, let us return to my home together. In the middle of the chief's reply, one of the horsemen ran into the square. He was panting heavily, and had an urgent report. In a high-pitched voice, the horseman said, Warrior Captain, we've sighted a lot of people around the village. They've surrounded the village and they're closing in.